So one of the things that we were asked is, breaking the chain of transmission, what should we do inside the hospital? And as you can imagine, everybody has actually learned on the job, and it has not been easy. We protocols from the various regulatory authorities have did come a little late, and most hospitals had to actually do a lot of the stuff on their own. So I'm really going to go through what HICC did during this time, and we can discuss this. A lot of hospitals have done exactly the same thing, and yes, we did have a lot of guidelines then coming up subsequently. But initially, when we faced this threat, there was not a lot of data that was available, and a lot of it had to be based on our knowledge of our dealing with influenza and various other diseases. So, if you remember, the first case that was diagnosed in India was on Jan 30th. And so, for us, actually, as HICC, it's important for us to anticipate these pandemics, and it's our job. And we had met and had a preliminary meeting, and we actually released a preliminary protocol on Jan 22nd. Subsequently, we realized when we started getting a lot of cases, our first cases started trickling in the first week of March. Before that, we just had a few people with sniffles. We did not have the capacity to test at that point in time. So all we could do is admit those patients and isolate them, but we couldn't do anything else, or we had to refer them into the government hospital. The tide really turned when we could actually test, which for us actually happened in the last week of March. But before that, we were continuing to be a hospital with a very busy outpatient and a very busy inpatient. So we had to put in protocols in place to ensure that even while we did not know where the transmission was happening, that we were keeping our healthcare workers and our other patients safe from cross transmission happening in the hospital. So what happened was we developed various teams, and we had a triage team, which actually took care of a screening system. We initially screened via high epidemiological risk, and then we started doing a symptom-based triaging. We also had a system for a very complex inpatient triaging system. We developed various protocols, whether it is environmental disinfection, infection control, engineering controls, crowd control, and made masking actually mandatory all over the hospital. Physical distancing was also introduced at this point in time. As you can imagine, this was extremely challenging during a time when we had about 9,500 outpatients a day. We also had a clinical treatment group, which generates evidence. It had regular meetings to synthesize evidence, had expert opinions, and guideline making actually came up as a result of this. So basically, this is seamless teamwork, and without seamless teamwork, nothing is possible. And these were the various groups, and we owe it to all these groups who came together and worked as a team to bring out the various things that were required to keep everyone safe. So this was a PPE committee, it was the most controversial committee, and it was difficult dealing with people's anxieties, patients' anxiety, and we actually made it mandatory to have universal masking since March, and it was difficult to get people to obey it, but we finally did succeed. We had periodic updates and revisions of protocols. It was not easy for us. And depending on the data that we generated, we had subsequently had multiple revisions of protocols. Lots of challenges with N95 masks. As you know, there was a break in the supply chain and an interruption. And though we had anticipated well ahead of time and we were well stocked, it was not easy for us. And a lot of inferior brands are flooding the markets. So we had to find a way of, amidst the lockdown, make sure that these masks were of good efficacy and were indeed keeping our healthcare workers safe. So constant reevaluation and data generation was key. And as you can see, that's our 3D simulation model that we came up indigenously. Obviously, we couldn't send it to any of the N95 NIOSH certifying companies, most of these masks, and we had to actually come up with stuff on our own, which we could have the data available, which would guide our reuse policies. These are the various activities that were taking place, and we owe a debt to MS office, or our medical superintendent's office, and the general superintendent's office to make all these a reality in the hospital. These were the Moment protocols, a number of engineering modifications, number of protocols, CHIPS department, which I think we pestered them to death, coming up with multiple protocols that were there and constant revisions. So now we come to a little bit of science. What is the personal protective equipment and what is the risk that we anticipate, and how do we actually go about assigning? Now, I think at the outset, I'd like to put in place a disclaimer. There is hardly any evidence as to what PP is best and what prevents what disease. And as you can imagine, a lot of it came from the Ebola virus disease. But even then, the data generation is not very much. And if you actually put personal protective equipment and meta-analysis or systematic reviews, there's hardly any data. You go through some studies, but I'd like to say that there's very little available there. So recently, actually, sometime in August, there was this paper in the Lancet, which actually, amidst all this controversy of some countries advising masking versus those countries which are not advising masking, and what is it that actually did they actually contribute to preventing disease? So as you can see, transmission was definitely lower when physical distancing was practiced. There was no doubt about that. Face masks resulted in a large reduction of risk, and there was no doubt about that. N95 masks obviously were better than surgical masks, and this was especially when worn in COVID areas. Eye protection also ended up with reducing the risk of infection. So these are the four things which actually came out that struck me in this particular Lancet meta-analysis. Now, there's also this paper, the controversial paper that came out in NEJM Perspective, where they talked about actually a potential for variolation as we await a vaccine. So whether, as we wear a face mask, this was actually to encourage people to wear a face mask, because they believe that if you are in a situation where you're in front of an aerosol which is generating infective virus, if you wore a mask, the chances are that you're likely to inhale a lower load of the virus, similar to variolation, as we did for the smallpox virus. So what is the evidence for this? And the evidence for this is on a cruise ship. I mentioned one of the data sets to you, actually. The passengers were provided with surgical masks, and the staff, the cruise ship staff, are provided with 95 masks. And so a lot of the passengers here actually had only asymptomatic infections. Whereas in a cruise ship where universal masking was not mandatory, a lot of them ended up with 80% symptomatic infections. So whether it was because the facial masking made them inhale a lower load, we'll never know, but this is the postulate that has been brought about. The other thing that has been noted is case fatality rate in countries with enforced or mandatory masking have been low even with the lifting up of lockdown. So probably it does work, and it's important for us to actually continue wearing face masks. Now, procedures with high aerosol generation, how do we define these? These are high-risk procedures that create potential aerosols with high viral loads that cause a threat to healthcare workers. And the factors which contribute to this is the duration of exposure, how long the exposure is, proximity of the provider to aerosols. And of course, if they were manipulating high viral load tissues during the generation of these aerosols. So was it the aeropharyngeal mucosa, nasopharyngeal mucosa, which actually has a high viral load? Aerosolization through devices has also been reported, cautery and drills, but we do know that these do not really generate high viral load aerosols. So the data from COVID is not available, but we can actually extrapolate a lot of the data from aerosol generating procedures from SARS. So a lot of the data has come about as a result of that. And now this is a complicated table. It's probably faint. You're probably not able to see it. But let me just summarize what it actually said. So what were the procedures which led to an increased risk of transmission? And they were tracheal intubation, non-invasive ventilation, tracheostomy care either while suction or while doing the tracheostomy, and of course a manual ventilation. So if you had the ambu bag and you press it, that would generate actually high aerosols. The ones which they felt were not significant were endotracheal aspirations, bronchoscopy, suction of body fluids, nebulizers, administration of oxygen, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and sputum collection. So what are the pooled estimate of risk? And this is the pooled estimate of risk. So you can see that intubation actually has a pooled estimate odds ratio risk of 6.6, suction before intubation 3.5, nebulization 0.9, manipulation of oxygen mask 4.6, non-invasive ventilation 3.1. So what can we do to protect ourselves? You have these aerosol generation. What is the data that is available with regard to medical masks and N95 masks? So I think there is increasing data available now that N95 mask or a medical mask does protect. So this is just one of the recent articles, and this was from Jan 1994 to Jan 2020. This was not really including too many corona cases. It was mainly including other respiratory virus. But as you can see here, the top panel where you see the diamond, the topmost diamond there is actually for N95 mask, and it did favor masks over not wearing an N95 mask at all. The second diamond, which is slightly more elongated, is actually medical mask that again does favor wearing of a medical mask, which means it did prevent infection and did protect against respiratory infectious diseases among healthcare workers. And then the pooled estimate that was there at the bottom. So it seems like there is enough data to say that a medical mask or a N95 mask does protect healthcare workers in prevention of infection. So these are the various comparisons of respiratory PPE. I'm really not going to go into that, but it's something if you're interested in. Surgical mask and N95 respirators. Apart from that, we have a lot of others which are powered air purifying respirators and etc., which we don't usually recommend. They are usable and do require fit testing in some of them, and some others they don't really require a fit testing. So WHO has actually distinguished various levels of risk, and the risks are definitely different for different staff in different areas. And if you have seen our own institutional protocols, you will see that according to a risk stratification, we've actually specified what PPE is actually required. And this is there in WHO, Ministry of Health guidelines, CDC guidelines, and even our own guidelines as such. So just a rough guideline, staff which are conducting triage, I think it's very important to ensure the patients are wearing a face mask. But then we do advise hand hygiene and the staff to wear a medical mask. Contact and droplet precautions for suspected or confirmed case of COVID-19 not involving aerosol generating procedures. This is all that is actually required. And if airborne precautions are required only in the case of aerosol generating procedures, and that is where we actually advise a respiratory mask or basically an N95 mask. Collection of specimen, if they're conducted in a way where you actually generate an aerosol, that again, you will require a respirator, but otherwise other gown, goggles, gloves, plus additional precautions are also recommended. So just to show you, this is what the WHO website actually has, and there is a similar table actually available even on the Ministry of Health website, and you can use these to actually guide as to what you would advise for your healthcare setting. So I was talking about what data there is, and so this is one of the Cochrane database of systematic reviews where they talked about personal protective equipment of preventing highly infectious diseases due to exposure to contaminated body fluids in healthcare workers. And the main idea of this was actually to generate evidence to deal with influenza as well as to deal with Ebola virus disease. But there's not too much data in Ebola virus disease. Instead, this has become something that can be extrapolated to respiratory viruses. So I think there's been a lot of anxiety among healthcare workers with regard to the types of PPE. Should we wear a hazmat suit? Should we wear a water repellent suit? Should we reuse a suit? Should we discard the surgical gown? what is it that is required. So these are some of the results of this very interesting systematic review. And what they really found was if PPE was made of breathable material, so similar to your surgical gown, versus water repellent material, which is your typical hazmat suit, really the so they did this as a simulation experiment, and same number of contamination spots were actually found with both the breathable material and the water repellent hazmat suits. But of course, the user satisfaction was much more for the hazmat suits. They felt protected and they felt better, but really the difference was really not too much. All of you must have come across the aprons that we have available in especially the outpatient setting, as these are just simple plastic aprons that are there. And of course, gowns are they are full sleeved. They protect most of your body, except probably the neck properly. So gowns obviously protect better than contamination from aprons. And they found that there are a variety of PPE alterations. So if you're able to make customize alterations to your PPE and adapt it to your setting, that actually can lead to less contamination. So you can add tabs to masks, to gloves, and seal glove and gown combinations. All of these actually seem to report less contamination.